Well, good afternoon. I'm Frosty Walker, Chief Information Security Officer for Texas Education Agency. And welcome to Cybersecurity Tips and Tools, Crisis Communication during a cybersecurity event. This is the first in a series of webinars regarding cybersecurity for the fall semester of 2018. Today, we will be covering crisis communication during a cybersecurity event. We hope you find this informative. We will allow time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. Should you have a question during the presentation, feel free to submit them and we will get them queued up for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The Data Security Advisory Committee, the DSAC, provides guidance to the Texas education communities, maximizing collaboration and communications regarding information security issues and resources, which can be utilized within the educational communities. The DSAC is currently comprised of representatives from school districts, ESCs, TEA, and the private sector. It is both diverse in size and geographically across the state, and include people that are willing to share their needs, ideas, and time to hopefully provide solutions for everyday cybersecurity issues within the education community. I want to thank everyone that participates on this committee for their time and efforts. Thank you, team. All of the information that the DSAC has collected and solutions that we have found to address those issues can be found at the Texas Gateway, https://www.texasgateway.org under Cybersecurity Tips and Tools. If you go to that URL, you will see towards the bottom of the page featured resources, and there you will find cybersecurity tips and tools. Today, while we're talking about crisis communication, we want everyone to understand that clear, crisp, consistent, and constant communication is critical and also calming in an event such as a cybersecurity issue. So today we're going to be looking at some of the types of communications that occur in a cybersecurity incident. Some of those will include alert notifications, and we'll go into detail about those. Issue investigation, which is an internal type of communications. We're going to our findings communications, which is internal. A remediation communications, which is internal. We're going to talk about dealing with third party and the communications that happens when we're dealing with third parties potentially. We're going to talk about leadership communications, again, which is internal. We're going to talk about media communications, which is how to deal with the media in a crisis situation such as cybersecurity incident. And last but not least, how we deal with our users or constituents should we have to do a breach notification. So let's talk a little bit about the alert notification. And what do we mean by alert notification? Well, how does somebody alert your security team or your information security officer that there may be a problem? So internally, when we're dealing with IT or within school, our teams, our developers, our web teams, who should they contact when they begin to see anomalies? That is up to your independent situation. Here, we contact our information security officer, myself, or one of my team. So we want to make sure that those users, particularly our IT users, understand who they should contact if they're seeing something in the logs or seeing something on a website that looks unusual. Who do they contact? Now, we also have internal users. So is it clear to our internal users who should they contact when they see anomalies or they see something that doesn't look right, or maybe they think they're seeing something that they shouldn't be seeing? Who do they contact? Again, here, our processes are clearly indicated that those users will contact information security. But what about external users? How do they let you know when they see a problem? Well, sometimes that's a little more difficult. Yes, you could post that on your website, and yes, you would get about 100 calls a day as somebody thinking they've seen anomalies. But perhaps that's the place to put that. Wherever you put it, you want people to know how they can get a hold of you. How can they report that? I can tell you that I receive anonymous phone calls. I have received calls saying, hey, I'm in a school district. I think I'm seeing something that looks irregular. But I don't want anybody to know my name. And I'm working with this application or on this website. Okay. Those are a little more difficult to deal with, but at least they have contacted someone. They've reached out to someone. In this case, they've reached out to me. They've reached out to Melody. We have users that see something that, and maybe it's nothing, but it's something that's different. Maybe we've had an update that changed the way something looked. And users are used to seeing things the way that they've seen it in the past. So they want to report that. Well, you have to deal with that. I'm going to be honest. Because users are users. And sometimes they may be right. And sometimes they may be wrong. But you have to treat any report as a potential issue. So that's what we're talking about when we meet alert notification. How does somebody contact you or someone in your organization to let you know that they're seeing something that doesn't look quite right? Dealing with a web application or dealing with an application could be as simple as the school homepage. Our users need to know how to contact someone in case they see that. So that is and again, we want to make that clear and concise in communicating who they contact and how they do that. Now that we have an issue, let's talk about how we actually communicate that issue internally. So first of all, it may go to our security team for their investigation. Once our security team begins to investigate that, I only allow them a 1-hour window anytime they see an anomaly. My team can only work on something for 1 hour. And if they can't resolve that in an hour, then we're going to raise the status of that issue to a potential incident. So we open our incident response red book and we document what's going on and what we've done so far. That allows us the ability to bring in additional people that we may need to work with. We may need to call in someone from another division, such as our operations team, such as our development team. We, in our particular situation, because our data center is hosted in a third party, we may request support from some of their security analysts to work with us as well. And because we're using a state network, we may call in someone to help us work with the statewide network from the Department of Information Resources. And all of that process is documented. But how do we communicate between those? Again, at this point, you're only talking about a potential issue, a potential incident. But my process is that I notify leadership. So I pick up the phone and I call Melody, our CIO, and I let Melody know that we are working on a potential issue, and then I will keep her updated. I may provide, as that goes forward, I may provide an hourly update. I may provide an update twice a day. But I want to make sure that Melody, or my CIO, is kept well informed of what's going on. I'll go back to an issue that happened recently in Atlanta, where the city of Atlanta had an issue with ransomware, and it actually, before they had notified leadership, they kept seeing something funny, and they kept seeing an anomaly, but they kept waiting to report that, and they didn't let their management know that they were investigating an issue until that issue began to spread across the entire network. And by the time they went, we really have a problem and we have to alert our leadership, they were in a big situation. They were in a difficult situation. And had they have taken the time to say, we're looking at a potential issue, we don't really understand what's going on, but we're seeing some anomalies across the network in a variety of our areas that we're suspicious that something's going on, we just can't put our hands on it. That might have helped them in that situation, at least within their own leadership and understanding what was going on, rather than picking up the phone and having to make a call and say, well, we've been looking at something for the last 48 hours, but we couldn't tell what it really was, and we didn't want to really alert anybody. So my recommendation is, when you start to look at this and as an incident, and again, I require my team, I give them only 1 hour to resolve that. If they, with their expertise, can't figure out what's going on, anyone on that team working on an incident, then they are required to say, we're going to move forward and open up an incident issue with this. I would much rather do that. At least we have some documentation, and then we find, oh, actually what's going on is we have an application that a password has expired and is trying to log on to a bunch of different machines and it's causing an issue. I'd much rather be able to say that was what caused that, rather than not identify that we have an issue, or to let them know that we had a false positive. Those are things that we look at all the time. But again, I recommend you talking between your teams and communicate what you're seeing. And I recommend that you document what you're seeing and you put that information together so that it can be shared in writing between the teams. Is that documentation need to be sent email? I typically don't. I typically do not do that. We typically create a book and we share it in a folder that only certain teams, and we can expand those rights as possible. But at this point, I want to keep what we're looking at to as small, if we're looking at an incident, as the smallest number of people that potentially need to know about that incident. So I try to keep it small, but I try to make that very precise. So let's talk about what we found. Our findings communications. For example, we may see a SQL injection vulnerability, or that we may see improper permissions on a file or a directory. We may only see a SQL injection attempt. And we see that quite frequently. We look and we see SQL injection attempts that are not successful. Sometimes our development team notifies us they're seeing something unusual. They send us over the logs. We look at it. We can identify that as SQL injection. And we also see that it's returning as a result of nothing. If that's the case, then we're fine. We were not vulnerable to SQL injection, but someone was trying to do a SQL injection. Or we may find that we have improper permissions on a file or directory. And so someone that wasn't able to see certain files before now might be able to. Again, those are just a couple of examples of what we might find. But what we might find that also results in, should that be SQL injection vulnerability that was actually executed, we may see an extraction of data. Or again, even with improper permissions on a file or a directory, we could see extraction of data, which would then lead to potential of unauthorized exposure. So we have to be very clear and concise as to what actually happened. And again, I recommend that you document that. Our incident red book there's a current version of that out again on the Texas Gateway, texasgateway.org under cybersecurity tips. It's at the very bottom of the page. There are several documents that can be downloaded there. So if you need a red book incident book, an incident red book, I would strongly recommend that you go and download that. The nice piece about that book is it actually lists on page 12, has a checklist of triage that you need to be doing. And that is where we actually have our teams document what we're seeing. The other thing about using that particular book is that it provides legal references to the different breach laws, to the all the different things that we may need to communicate, and it gives us information on that for the state of Texas. So that is just a couple of things that we might find and how we communicate that internally of what we're seeing. And who would we communicate that to? Well, again, depending on what we found, but it may be to our development team, it could be to our operations team. It just depends on what was actually found and what the results are. But again, we want to make that a clear and concise communication where possible. Remediations. So now we have found what we think is causing the problem, what we are sure is causing the problem. Here's what our problem is. And here is how we can resolve it. I'll give you an example. Let's say we find a SQL injection vulnerability. How do we fix that? Well, we may have to run a vulnerability scan on that machine to verify that indeed was vulnerable to a SQL injection, and that we could actually then see data that was potentially being extracted from an application. Excuse me. And then within that vulnerability scan, it will typically tell us what it will take to resolve that. And it will tell us how much man time potentially it will take to resolve that, or how much effort will it take to resolve that issue. And again, if it was something simple like an improper permissions on a directory or a folder, it may only take 5 minutes to fix. Or it could take quite a considerable amount of time to fix. Again, we want to communicate that concisely and informatively to our leadership. Again, I do that in person. I want to be able to answer questions. I don't want there to, typically I don't not like to send that in an email, because that email might be discoverable, even though it shouldn't be discoverable because it's a security issue. But still, emails can be misconstrued. Someone may inadvertently in a discovery include something that they shouldn't, and then we have another issue on our hands. So again, I like to make those communications in person, or at least on a phone call, but typically I would do that in person. Oh, let's talk a little bit about third party, because in many cases our data services, our web services, are actually through a third party or involve third parties. So within our contracts, we should have contact information, who we can get a hold of when we have an issue. We should have in our contracts permission to run a vulnerability scan, because then we can tell exactly what the problem is, and we can also give them some remedy time frames in which they can look at. All of this information should be included in your contact. And it should be included in your contract, that these are the things they have to provide you: contact information, you have to have permission to run a vulnerability scan, and you need to agree upon a remedy time frame. Those should all be in your contracts. So how you will handle that. Now, in that case, you may have to do that in writing. In many of the cases, you may not have a phone number, simply an email. So in your third party, we have to deviate just a little bit from what we're talking about. If we have a way to communicate over a phone, but at least in writing, we're going to notify them that we have identified an issue and that they need to contact us. Okay? So I want everyone to understand that information should be included in your contract information. So we need to look at Texas Business Code. If we determine that we have a potential exposure or a potential unauthorized access, according to the Texas Business Code and Commerce Code, a breach of system security means unauthorized acquisition of a computerized data that comprises of security, confidentiality, or the integrity of sensitive information. And sensitive personal information was or is reasonably believed to have been acquired by an unauthorized person. So it could just be a potential exposure versus an actual confirmed exposure. but they have to be treated under Texas Business and Commerce Code in the same manner. We're going to typically talk, when we talk with our leadership, we're now down to what has occurred. We've had a compromise. How many of you had a compromise? You can raise your hand. You don't have to raise it on your tools there. On our webinar, you can just raise your hand in the air. A compromise occurs frequently. When malware gets loaded onto a machine, when software that is not supposed to be on a machine is then loaded on it, then you have a compromise. Was that a potential of a breach or an exposure? No. It was a compromise. We have a machine. We may have been able to clean that machine with our tools and not re-image that machine. It was compromised, but we were able to confirm that we did not have any potential exposure or exposure. So at that point, here's what happened. We had a machine, we had malware running on it, we re-imaged it. That shows up in a monthly report for me. How many machines have we had to re-image this month because of malware? That was a compromise. And by the way, that answer is very simple. I think we've re-imaged 2 machines this year. But what if we're dealing with a potential exposure? Notification is required. According to Texas statute, we are required to notify those users that were potentially had their sensitive information exposed. Or if we know that there was a breach, that we did have an exposure, that also requires notification. And we will have to communicate that to our leadership. Here's what's happened. Here is what, according to the state statute, we need to do. Here's what all you need to do. In fact, I can tell you that if I have a potential exposure or a breach, by state law, I am required to notify the Department of Information Resources within 48 hours. The commissioner is required by state statute to notify the governor's office, the Speaker of the House office, and the Lieutenant Governor's office. So those are all states. Those are all statutes and requirement that would be called internal. They're really an external communication within the state community. Again, those specifically are requirements for agencies and do not specifically apply to schools, but you need to look at how you would report that and who you would want to report that within your organization, and that should be documented. Those communications are critical. You do not want a school board member reading about a potential exposure for the first time in the media. You will want that to be covered in a board meeting prior to the announcement. So there are things that you need to make sure that you have processes that are documented on what communications will take place in case you have such an incident. And next month, we're going to talk about how to practice for incident response. And your communications will be part of that practice. So you'll have an opportunity to practice that. But again, on leadership communications, what do you need to do? You need to be exact about what's being communicated. You need to make sure that you explain what has happened. Is it simply compromise? You know, we found nothing that where we feel like there was a potential for exposure. Any of those communications need to be made and be consistent and clearly understood. Make sure that you answer questions from your leadership. Dealing with the media. This is probably the worst nightmare that people that deal with cybersecurity and information security have. This is the nightmare that recurs over and over and over. And there's good reason for that. This is not an easy thing to do. Media notice should be developed through your usual public communication processes. Should contain the following information: a brief description of the details of the event, a description of the individuals impacted in the aggregate. For example, we had Social Security numbers. We had grades for 12 students, 12 high school students that were potentially disclosed. So you make that very precise, and you makes it easily to understand. Was it spread across all campuses? Was it? No, it just happened in high school. Was there a specific high school? If it's a specific high school, you want to be able to clarify that. So you narrow that down. You want to be as specific as you can about who was impacted without providing names. Then you want to describe the actions that's being taken by your agency or your school. You want to describe, hey, we have remediated the issue. We have placed additional safeguards in place to ensure that this is not going to happen again. And you want to make a statement on whether evidence indicates that the data may have been misused. For example, we also have a tool that we look for data that's being sold or exchanged on the dark web. So if I potentially think I have a potential exposure, I'm going to go out and do searches on the dark web to see if I can find any of those usernames or those social security numbers or those names and grades, whatever was exposed. I'm looking for that type of information on the dark web. And you're going to want to provide contact information for questions. If you have further questions, please contact our legal department at 512-666-6666. Whatever that number is. You want to make it as clear and concise as you can in that statement for when people read that, what they're going to do, and who is the media going to contact if they have additional questions. I'm not speaking to the media. We have a public public communications department that will handle all communications outside the agency, other than what's required to me to make a phone call. Okay? So you want to make sure that you covered all of those things within your communications. Now, let's talk a little bit about your breach notification. And an example of this is in the incident response Red Book that is available out on Cybersecurity Tips and Tools at texasgateway.org. But this is what you want to include if you have to write a breach notification to individuals impacted. You're going to talk about their name. You want to be able to call them. You want their first name, their last name, their address. Dear Mr. Walker, your name and certain personal information was potentially exposed in an incident occurred between these times. This means that the information may have been exposed without your authorization or the authorization of your entity, your school district. We want to apologize right up front. We apologize for any inconvenience this offers you. Although there is no evidence of any information being misused, we may choose to provide you free credit monitoring coverage, or you may not. But again, that's up to you. You are going to describe the incident and what the agency or what the school is doing to mitigate the incident. You want to talk about how you're committed to help you safeguard your information. And we as an entity are providing you with free credit monitoring and identity theft services for a year. If, again, you may not want this paragraph in there. Well, we have set up a website that will help you to protect your information and will provide you with updates on this matter. You may call your breach, whoever you choose as your breach manager, to ask for help in keeping your data safe. If you are enrolling a minor, you will need to call the breach management to process their enrollment manually. Child enrollment cannot be conducted online. So you have to make sure that if you're dealing with potentially adults, or if you're dealing primarily with someone under the age of 18. We also recommend that you take the following steps to protect your identity. Contact one of the national credit reporting agencies below and ask for a fraud alert report on your credit report. The agency will alert all other agencies. Remember to renew the fraud alerts every 90 days. The state does not have the authority to do this for you. As the contract bureaus must have your permission to set up the alerts. The credit reporting agencies do not knowingly maintain credit files on children under 18. You may contact each agency to determine if a child has a file or if the child's information has been misused. And here are a list of the most common fraud reporting where you can call in and establish those. So you include that information. You're going to request a copy of your credit report from the credit reporting agencies and carefully review the reports for any activities that look suspicious. You want to monitor your bank account, your health records, your medical insurance company explanation of benefits to ensure that no transactions or other actions that you did not initiate, or authorize. Report any suspicious activity in your records to your bank, your healthcare keeper, whoever that is. You report it to them. Report any suspicious activity of your records, healthcare, to your local police or your sheriff's office, and file a police report. Keep a copy of this report in case you need it to clear your personal records. You can go to the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft programs by visiting, and there's a website that your impacted users can go to get more information. And then, of course, if you're agreeing to provide credit monitoring, they can enroll in the free credit monitoring or identity theft services provided by your entity. There are no costs to you for this service, but you must enroll. You want to make that very clear. There's no cost, but you must enroll. And how they do that. Again, we talk about how to enroll a minor child. You cannot do that. Someone under 18 cannot be enrolled online in one of the breach management vendors. Monitor the website through your breach manager's entity site for periodic updates. We, the entity, Texas Education Agency, Independent School District, regrets that this action is necessary. Please be assured that we're committed to helping you protect your credit and identity and ensuring that you have information that your information is safe and secure. If you have any question, please call and provide contact information. And sincerely, and provide an authorized signature. Again, this letter is in electronic format in the Incident Response Red Book available on the texasgateway.org under Cybersecurity Tips and Tools. So, at this point, we're going to open it up for questions today. I appreciate everything very much. Y'all have been a great audience. Until we have opportunity to visit again, please keep things safe and sound. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.